At the end of the 20th century, the Royal Navy's role is defence. The defence of the United Kingdom, her allies and her interests abroad. To fulfil the varied jobs brought about in this role, the Royal Navy has 131 ships, 45,500 men and women, and 256 aircraft, costing almost £3.7 billion each year. In 1900, the Royal Navy's role is to defend the empire, an empire that stretches across the globe. Across the Atlantic is Canada. On the other side of the world is Australia and New Zealand. And in between there are numerous territories in Africa and the Far East. To defend these countries, Britain has the largest and most powerful navy in the world. The steelworks of Britain are turning out ships faster than ever before, and by 1900, the Royal Navy has 36 battleships, more than all her potential enemies put together. On the horizon is a new class of battleship, one that will make all others obsolete. The Dreadnought and its 6 sister ships were launched between 1906 and 1910. Costing more than £1.8 million each, they have a revolutionary steam turbine. This means they are lighter than the conventional battleships, which allows more than twice the armament. For the first time, 10 massive 12-inch guns can be fired in one broadside. Over the next few years, the guns get even bigger. The Queen Elizabeth class has 8 15-inch guns. This means that they can fire shells weighing almost 2,000 pounds over 13 miles. They are also faster, at 25 knots, a speed brought about by switching from coal to oil-fired boilers. In 1914, Britain goes to war against Germany. The first British victory of the Sea War is fought in the South Atlantic. On the 8th of December 1914, Vice Admiral Sir Doveton Sturdy uses the superior speed and armament of his battle cruisers to destroy a German force commanded by Admiral von Speer. The Battle of the Falkland Islands revenges the defeat a month earlier of a British force off the Chilean coast at Coronel. On the fleet's return to port, King George V congratulates Sturdy and his men. His presence on board ship shows the importance of the victory and the lessons learned from it. Sturdy had concentrated his force to take advantage of his superior firepower. There are now no German forces of any significance left at sea to attack merchant shipping. Unfortunately, the lessons are not put into practice during the largest fleet action of the war. By 1916, the British Grand Fleet is trained to perfection, but without an enemy in sight. However, the German Commander-in-Chief, Admiral Scheer, decides on a plan to lure the Grand Fleet from its base in Scapa Flow. Using an attack on merchant shipping as a decoy, he hopes to find the fleet without destroyer protection and decimate it near the German coast. Britain has already found the ability to intercept and decode German naval messages, and so the Grand Fleet sails on the 30th of May 1916. First, the two battlecruiser fleets engage. The British, under the command of Admiral Sir David Beatty, find themselves outgunned and lose 2 ships. Beatty, however, continues to pursue until the German high seas fleet is sighted. He then turns and lures the enemy into the waiting guns of British battleships under the command of Admiral Jellicoe. Jellicoe deploys his ships brilliantly, and the German fleet finds itself at a tactical and numerical disadvantage. The German fleet reverses course and achieves a temporary escape. However, Scheer only blunders into the devastating fire of the Grand Fleet again. As night falls, the German fleet batters its way through the screen of light British forces between them and their home bases and slips home. There is no doubt that otherwise there would have been an overwhelming defeat for the high seas fleet the next day. 250 ships fight the only major surface action of the war. The British lose more ships, 14 compared to the Germans' 11, but strategically it is a British victory. Jellicoe believes that he cannot win the war by defeating the German fleet, but that he can lose the war if he did not preserve his own. His cautious manner leads to his replacement the following year by Admiral Beatty. Beatty, however, continues with the cautious policy. The Grand Fleet continues to blockade Germany for the rest of the war. Meanwhile, Scheer's failure at Jutland leads him to pursue the other half of his offensive policy, war under the sea. Using both guns and torpedoes, U-boats sink more than 11 million tons of Allied shipping. In the winter of 1916-17, Britain is close to defeat at sea. However, the instigation of the convoy system in April 1917 is very successful. Essential supplies begin to flow again. U-boat losses soar, and with the introduction of new anti-submarine technology, Britain's supply route is secure. The straits between Dover and the French coast are vital to Britain. Across these few miles go all the supplies for the British Army. Despite German forces holding the Belgian coast for most of the 4 years of the First World War, their navy singularly fails to interrupt the flow. On occasions they do try, taking on the destroyers of the Dover Patrol. In one of these attacks, the German destroyers are soundly beaten by the crews of HMS Swift and HMS Broke. It is one of the few naval actions of the 20th century in which ramming and hand-to-hand fighting take place. As well as protecting the supply route, the Royal Navy also takes the fight to the enemy on the Belgian coast. They build up a force of bombardment ships, specially designed for this task. They are called monitors. The monitors fight out their own private war against German shore batteries. With the German fleet effectively neutralized and the U-boat menace countered by the use of convoy, the Royal Navy then plays its part in reducing supplies to Germany. This virtual blockade of German ports helps to hasten the end of the war. The First World War at sea ends in stalemate. Jutland proves to be the final action in history where two magnificent fleets of battleships meet on the high seas. Dreadnought and its sister ships had been a new breed, but a breed that was to last for just a few short years, for the day of the battleship is effectively at an end. In 1921, off the east coast of the United States, one event finally seals the long-term fate of the battleship. General Billy Mitchell, an exponent of air power, bombs and sinks a captured German ship, the Ostfriesland. The supremacy of the battleship is over. It is still a time away, but the new capital ship for the world's navies is the aircraft carrier. Tried and tested during the First War, the aircraft carrier gained strength during the 1920s and 30s. Initially, they are little more than colliers or ferries converted to seaplane carriers. They cannot even launch an aircraft, merely winching one over the side, where it taxis and flies away. However, the theory develops, and the flat top, complete with its own runway, soon appears. The Navy had been the first of the British armed services to embrace the aircraft before the war. Now it is taking the lead in this new way of warfare. For most of the 20 years between the wars, the Royal Navy has little control over its own aviation. The struggle between the Navy and the newly formed Royal Air Force is bitter, with Sir David, now Earl Beatty, arguing with the RAF. They seem to be getting somewhere in 1924, when the Fleet Air Arm of the RAF is formed. It is agreed that so-called fleet flights, normally controlled by the RAF, will be given over to the Navy when they're flown from aircraft carriers. The struggle finally ends in 1937, with the Fleet Air Arm returning to the control of the Navy. The aircraft carrier creates a new kind of warfare. Aircraft can now be carried as part of the fleet. They can be used for fleet protection, and so purpose-built naval fighters are built. They can also be used as part of a strike force against both sea and land targets, and so carrier-borne bombers are ordered. Naval aviation brings forward specialist naval aircraft manufacturers. Among them is Blackburn Aircraft, based in Bruff, near Hull. They build a number of torpedo bombers, starting with the Dart in 1923. Its top speed is only 107 miles per hour, but its landing speed of just 38 miles per hour makes it a natural choice for aircraft carrier use. The Dart is followed by the Ripple, which sets the standard for British torpedo bombers until the arrival of the first of the monoplanes in 1939, the Bristol Beaufort. By 1939, the carrier is an essential part of the Royal Navy. Warfare is changing from ship versus ship conflict to aircraft versus ship, with devastating effect. Germany never embraces the carrier concept. 2 carriers are planned, but never materialize. So, as Hitler brings his war plans to fruition in the late 1930s, naval aviation is not a priority. He is, however, a confirmed believer in sea power. The Anglo-German Naval Treaty of 1935 allows Germany to build a fleet up to 35% of the size of the Royal Navy. This is based on Earl Beatty's belief that Germany is one country in the world we have nothing to fear in the way of an arms race. In the next few years, the sight of German battleships and battle cruisers on the high seas will show how misguided these comments are. The Royal Navy herself had seen severe cutbacks after the First World War. But in 1936, as Hitler widens his sphere of influence in Europe, more orders are placed for warships of every size. At the outbreak of war, the Royal Navy is once again the largest navy in the world. There are 12 battleships, with 9 more under construction, 3 battle cruisers and numerous cruisers, destroyers, and specialist ships. But the reconstruction program to bring new types into service is only just beginning. It remains to be seen whether they can meet the threat of a rearming German Kriegsmarine. The Schleswig-Holstein had been built in 1906 at the Germania yards as one of 5 Deutschland-class ships of the line. She fought at Jutland in 1916 before becoming flagship to the German fleet in the 1920s. But on the 1st of September 1939, she fires the first shots in Hitler's campaign to invade Poland. By bombarding Danzig, she ignites a flame that will burn for almost 6 years. Germany's conquest of Poland is swift. The Polish Air Force is destroyed on the ground in 2 days, as modern bombers wreak havoc on Polish airfields. A week later, the German Blitzkrieg reaches the outskirts of the Polish capital. Although Warsaw itself holds out until the 27th of September, effectively the campaign is over. A nation of 33 million people is crushed almost before the war has started. The first attacks on German shipping in their northern German ports are carried out by Bomber Command. However, the wrong fuses mean that even when bombs do hit, they normally bounce off before exploding. It is to be left to the Navy to score the first big hit. The German pocket battleship, the Graf Spee, is cornered in Montevideo harbor in neutral Uruguay. It has been the most successful of the surface raiders sent out from German ports soon after the outbreak of war, sinking 9 ships in barely 2 months in the Indian Ocean. British ships are sent to hunt her down, but Graf Spee has slipped back into the Atlantic. 3 cruisers under the command of Commodore Henry Harwood assemble off the mouth of the River Plate, assuming that Graf Spee will aim for ships plying the trading routes south of Brazil. On the 12th of December, they bring Graf Spee to battle. Heavily outgunned, the British cruisers nevertheless inflict damage on the German ship, which turns away and drops anchor in Montevideo harbor. Knowing that Graf Spee still constitutes a major threat, the British ply the radio stations with misinformation about the strength of non-existent British forces in the area. This pressures Graf Spee's captain, Hans Langsdorff, into cabling Berlin for advice. The alternatives are to fight their way out to Argentina, where the government is sympathetic, or face internment. Hitler's reply recommends neither. And so on the 18th of December, in front of watching crowds and the world's press, Graf Spee slips out of harbor and transfers her crew to a waiting German steamer. Within minutes, the night sky is lit up by flames as her magazines are blown up with thunderous explosions. 2 days after the scuttling of his ship, Captain Langsdorff commits suicide. Since the capitulation of Poland, Europe has enjoyed an uneasy peace. But in April 1940, the focus switches to Norway. Germany has been receiving supplies of Swedish iron ore through Norwegian ports to avoid the British blockade of Germany. To counter this, the Royal Navy begins mining their coastal waters. To protect his supply lines, Hitler orders the occupation of Norway. By the 9th of April, German forces have landed and are occupying the capital, Oslo, and the main ports of Trondheim, Narvik and Bergen. And this is despite the presence of the Royal Navy's home fleet, consisting of 30 ships which fight a number of small engagements but never bring the main German force to battle. At sea, the British fight back well in 2 operations at Narvik. On the 10th of April, the destroyer flotilla enters the fjord and sinks 3 German destroyers and a number of merchant ships. 3 days later, the battleship Warspite and 9 destroyers go back to deal with the remaining German ships. The last 8 German destroyers and a single U-boat are sunk, leaving the Royal Navy in command of the fjord and the northern waters off Norway. With German forces neutralized, the belated British landings take place. However, a few brigades of mainly territorials with no effective air cover are all that is available to take on 7 German divisions. 2 of the landings, at Namsos and Andalsnes, are evacuated within 3 weeks. Only at Narvik does a mixed force of British, French and Polish troops